Does God choose your spouse? Listen carefully. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined together with his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Hold on to that. Matthew 19 and verse 6 says this: what God has joined together. Does God choose your spouse? In this video, we're going to discuss if God chooses your spouse or if we choose our spouse on our own. My name is Jaquan, and before we get started into this video, I would like to ask that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss how to prepare for marriage and give marriage advice as well. Without further ado, let's hop into this topic. So over on TikTok, I had made a post called How to Overcome Your Fear of Marriage. In that post, I posted 4 things, but it's the top 2 that set somebody off. The first thing I said was to trust God's design for marriage. The second thing I said is let him choose your spouse. Man, why did I say that? Well, one of the things that the person responded and said is that marriage is more of a practical concession where people who could not control their sexual desires needed to marry. That's a reference to Paul saying in 1 Corinthians 7 and 9, how it is better to marry than to burn. Another thing this person said was, God gives us free will. He doesn't intervene or get involved in our decision on who we choose as a spouse. Another thing that this person says is that God just simply honors the choice that we make. The other thing is that God doesn't care whether we marry or not. Now, before I respond to this, I want to be very clear. This is not an opportunity for me to clap back at somebody who left a comment. I appreciate the comments, but what it has done is allow me to further explain where I was coming from in terms of what I meant if God chooses our spouse or not. Okay, since we are asking if God chooses our spouse, I'm going to ask that you bear with me over the next few minutes because I am going to get biblical. That's typically the approach I take anyway, but especially since we're talking about God, I want you to go on a journey with me as we discuss this further. In the first instance I want to bring to your attention is Genesis 2, verses 22 to 24. In this section of the Bible, as you can see, marriage is extremely important to God. It's so important that after God has set up Adam in the Garden of Eden, the next thing he does, he begins to say how it is not good for man to be alone. Out of that, he forms Eve. In forming Eve, the Bible says that he presented or brought her to Adam. Adam was happy with God's selection. He immediately agreed with what was presented to him, or rather should I say who was presented to him. And then that led to what verse 24 says. Listen carefully. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined together with his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Key word, they shall be joined together. Okay? Hold on to that because we're going to dive into that right into the next thing that we discuss. Matthew 19 and verse 6 says this: what God has joined together, let no man put asunder or separate. This isn't an argument by any sense, but I think it's very clear there that God joins us together, puts us together, aka he has a direct input, or at least he would like to, on the decision that we make when we decide to choose our spouse. And my last thing, I'll say this to you. Let me give you some examples in the Bible that show you that God does choose our spouse, or at least he would like for us to allow him to be involved in that decision. The first instance, Adam and Eve. Again, God presented Eve to Adam. Matter of fact, let's make it 4 because I got 3 more for you. The next one is Isaac and Rebekah. If you remember in Genesis 24, Abraham's last request to his servant was that he would make sure that he would help Isaac choose a wife, but not in Canaan where they currently were, but rather going back to his family, going back to his kindred, going back to his country to find him a wife there. That's where he found Rebekah. If you remember the story, The servant prayed for a sign once he got there. That sign was provided by God. So again, that's an example of God choosing, okay, or intervening into that situation. Another example is Hosea and Gomer. Now this will blow your mind a bit if you don't know the story. God specifically tells the prophet to go find a wife of whoredoms. I don't think I need to say much more. And then my last example for you, which is a little bit more subtle, but it is our fourth example here. That fourth example is Boaz and Ruth. If you know the story, you know that the way that this thing happened, it wasn't by happen chance. God specifically put Ruth directly in the field where she was gleaning. Whose field was it? It was Boaz's field. The reason I say that is because if we understand the lineage, she became someone who was in the lineage of Jesus. Okay? So again, this is just giving some examples to show that number one, God does intervene and he does help us choose our spouse. Shows you also that there is a bigger purpose to the selection that God desires for us. So in summary, I want to say this. If we're going to say that we are Christians, we need to be careful in how we interpret and how we read the Bible, especially with the biggest decision that you'll ever make in your life. To think that God should not be involved, doesn't want to be involved, is crazy. As Christians, when we say that we are being led by the Spirit or we want what God has for us, then if that is the case, then we allow God to lead us even in the selection of our spouse. Personally, this is a decision that I have made, and I absolutely had God help me in the selection of my wife. Another thing that was said that I want to address, again, in closing, is that marriage was more of a concession. Okay, it was more of something that was, take it if you want it, no. Marriage is a covenant. It's not a concession. And the reference that was being made by the young lady was in 1 Corinthians 7 and 9. Unfortunately, marriage didn't start in the New Testament. It started in the Old. And what we're not going to do is try to separate Old versus New Testament and say that we're not going to listen to what the Bible has to say about marriage in the Old Testament. Again, I don't think much has changed from Genesis 2. And we see that Jesus mentioned and referenced the Old Testament in Matthew 19. The idea of free will was brought up as well. Now, yes, let me say this much. We do have the free will. We have the free will to choose God's selection. We have the free will to go rogue and do what we want to do and choose who we want. We have the free will to do anything. But I'd like to believe as believers, and even people who are not believers, the idea that there is God, something greater than you that sees further than what you see, that even with free will, and I will speak as Christians, because this was a person who was Christian who responded, that we should include God in this decision, even with our free will. So does God choose your spouse? Well, the answer is yes, but I'll say this much as well. God does choose our spouse, or let's say he wants to choose your spouse if you allow him to get involved in that part of your life. If you do not allow God to get involved in that part of your life, you didn't allow him to help you in that decision, so that answer is no. So again, I will say this, just because we have free will doesn't mean that we should make this decision without the help of God, who I believe will help you choose your spouse. When you think about this, you'll see that there's a few reasons why God does want to help you choose your spouse. One of those reasons is to cut back on stress. Another one of those reasons is to help to eliminate any hurt or pain that can be involved in making the wrong selection on our own. Another reason for God wanting to choose our spouse is so that we can avoid divorce. Will you allow God to be involved in your decision on picking in choosing your spouse, or will you take this heavy burden on your own without the help of God? Hey, listen, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. On this channel, as a reminder, we discuss how to prepare for marriage and we give marriage advice. We'll see you on the next video.